well, I've spent a little bit of money on this, so I'm going to get through the tutorial. I'm going to like give it a little bit of time to kind of like see how it opens up. But if you get it for free, then you're like, this fucking game had better just titillate all of my senses immediately or I'm out of here.
Butterscotch.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 528 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's July 3rd, 2020 vibes. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for letting us grab your money every month to help keep this podcast going.
Nice.
All right, so we got a couple of little news items, and then we're gonna do a question, maybe two questions. We'll see. First off, if you haven't picked up all of our games, do it now because the Steam Summer Sale ends a day after this episode comes out. So. I'm assuming everybody who subscribes to the podcast listens to it immediately, like as soon as it comes out.
Actually,
Statistically, most do, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Most,
right.
yeah, exactly. So if you're hearing this, that means you got one more day until the prices go back to normal.
And we got a studio bundle that has all the games in it with an extra, 10% off or something like that?
Yeah, extra 10%. Yep.
Yeah, so you're basically getting games for free at that point.
Yeah, like Levelhead's like 80% off. I can't remember what Crashlands is. Probably similar. Anyway, they're all pretty cheap.
Yeah.
So get in there, get them. I've been kind of lurking in the Discord and seeing a bunch of the new players popping in to all the different games. And I always like these times of the year when like all of our stuff is on sale because you kind of get that like influx of enthusiasm, you know.
Refresh blood.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. And update 1.2 is going great. There's like a couple of little minor quest bugs that we'll be fixing up, but nothing game breaking. So get in there, have fun with it. And that's all the studio news. We're on break this week, so we haven't done anything. We've just been chilling. It's been pretty nice. On the industry side of things, though, people have not been chilling.
No. The vibes are off. Okay.
There's no chill. Microsoft decided, fuck everybody, fuck everything, burn it all down, and they fired 9,000 people. And I think about 2,000 of those were at Xbox. It's unclear if that means just like games or if that's just the Xbox division.
Basically, it cuts across the board with a heavy concentration in like Microsoft's all of their gaming.
In the gaming.
Stuff, which is important to remember that they bought like a bajillion studios, for like $67 billion or something a couple of years ago, and they've been slowly
now they're just deleting them, just systematically purging them.
Yep.
Which is something we talk about a lot of like, once you get purchased, if your company gets purchased, it is not a company anymore. It's an asset. It's an investment. And if there's even a sliver of a chance that investment isn't going to pay off, it will be sold for scrap or just deleted. Right. Just write it off as a loss. Boom. Company can get a little tax deduction off of that.
Yeah. And if you're selling to like a publicly traded company or to a private equity firm, then they don't even care if there's a way to make money, like to continue making money. They're still going to scrap you for parts. That's just how that works.
Whatever
makes the quarterly line go up.
So I think the wildest thing about it, so one, of course, is that we've been seeing these just kind of a continuous wave of layoffs in the industry since, 2023, I think now. It is insane. And especially with this, like the size of this cut, I think this is the biggest one actually, like in games. Someone said it's equivalent in scale to like the size of the whole Australian games industry or something. It's like
probably
just deleted.
Just deleted. It's just an insane amount. And so, of course, for all of our fellow devs and artists and programmers and stuff who've been affected, it just like sucks. And hope everybody figures out some way to land on their feet. I think that sucks about it the most is like the suddenness of the volume of it just means that like that's a big shock for then all those people to somehow get reabsorbed into other things. It's kind of like a labor market problem.
Yeah, well,
right?
the whole industry, the labor market is completely fucked. already. So yeah, it can't even just handle the people who've already been fired or coming into the industry, right?
Yeah.
And just to throw 9,000 more people in there is not good. And there's a lot of like you'll hear a lot of people who aren't the ones who make games. So gamers, some people in journalism who don't like really get it, being like, oh, this is going to be a wave of new indie titles, and like, oh, all these people now they're free from their AAA overlords and they can go, just like make an indie game, as if that is actually a reasonable path, because that isn't a reasonable path for almost anybody, because you got to have health insurance, you got to support your family in some way, and indie games statistically not a good way to do that. So
well, but also not everybody being fired is a developer, right? Like,
yep.
If you got like a bunch of QA people, you've got a bunch of administrative staff, et cetera, like they may not be interested in like building an entire game themselves, like, so I don't know. It's rough out there. We just want to acknowledge, good luck to everybody who this has happened to, and I hope you can.
And tonally, I mean, the memo from Phil Spencer came out about the whole thing. He's the head of Xbox, and I think the dumbest thing about all this is like tonally, they're basically saying that, we've never been in a better position. We're doing great. There's been incredible engagement across the board. We're doing more with our games than ever before. Also get fucked. And so it's just like, I don't know. They might
as well have just written, we didn't need to do this, but we did it anyway.
That's kind of the vibe. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. It's really.
Yeah. The fucked up framing of it was like, yeah, this was like a really hard decision for us to make to do this. However, and like we've been so successful this past year, we've been doing so good in all these different dimensions. But the only reason we've been doing so good is because we've made this type of decision many times before, and so we have to do it again. We just got to keep doing this over and over again. We don't want to do it, but it's the only way to keep being successful. Just insane. Just absolutely fucking insane. So don't love that.
Nope.
But that's just what's happening. And that just kind of reflects a broader trend in the games industry that we've been seeing for the past several years of just, money drying up, funding drying up, games getting canceled, studios getting deleted, layoffs all over the place. So
it is rough out
also.
There.
Yeah, like was it last week we were just talking about the like Netflix dropping a whole bunch more games from their roster. Yeah, so we're definitely in a contraction.
Yep.
Like in an industry contraction. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's permanent, because like there are business cycles like boom and bust. We're in a bust. We just did a bust right now. So just got to survive. That's the goal. So anyways, that happened. Let's get into some questions. Let's go. So these questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. Highest upvoted question comes from Ronniethebear, who says, I was working on my game and started to realize one of the features was making it cumbersome to make other features. Then I realized my game is not live, the troublesome feature isn't that great, and no one's going to miss it. So I nuked it. Can you think of any features you've nixed to make way for better ones?
Oh,
yeah.
I think the thing is, to your point, it's very easy to do. I mean, it's very cathartic to do, frankly, when you're working on it in a game that's just in development, right? Where there's no players. It is a impossible task to cut something once the game is out and have some portion of people not just lose their marbles about it. So I think
the only way to do it is like Final Fantasy 14 style, where they're like, okay, we're going to just take the whole game offline. Right. For a year and just redo it, right? Because if you change, it actually reminds me of how in high school there was a rule you can't have water bottles, because apparently high school students would just put vodka in there or something. I don't know. Every rule in high school was insane, but you couldn't have water bottles in class. But I wanted to stay hydrated for swimming, and so I brought a gallon jug of water into class, and nobody said a word about it. And I think if you kind of do things egregiously enough,
that's true,
so far beyond people's expectations, then they're like, oh, well, they probably have a good reason.
I don't even.
There's probably a good reason for this.
yeah. I think
you can't just rip out one feature.
A loaf of bread to just
because you couldn't have food in class either. But I brought an entire loaf of bread, and I would eat I would just eat bread slices.
This is in the back with a gallon jug of water, a loaf of bread, and the teacher's up there
just slurping away and munching away, and they're like, I mean, he's pretty confident about
this.
The thing. I feel like somebody must have authorized.
Yeah, if you're breaking the rule that intensely, I feel like people just discount their own intuition about like whether or not it's allowed because they're like, I mean, it's insane. So clearly
there has to be a reason.
It's the same as if you ever want to do something that maybe like your homeowners association would be upset about or something, do it, but just put on a reflective vest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're like, oh yeah, like I'm going to like burn a bunch of stuff in my front yard. People will be upset about it. Put on a reflective vest, you know, and then and maybe a hard hat. People are like, oh, this is probably, there's some kind of a crew, right? Or if you want to get into
the other one.
Carrying a ladder is the other trick, right? Like you want to get into somewhere, carry a ladder because people are like, oh, well, they're probably there to fix something, right? So yeah, point being like, if you're going to rip a feature out of a game, but that's all you do, right? Then like people will get pissed off. But if you do it in a big enough way, in a confident enough way, then you can get away with it probably.
I think in terms of like in development stuff, there's been, I mean, this kind of is the process, I think, with designing a game, which is that
it's what iteration is, right?
Exactly. It's like, okay, we got this we picked some base mechanic that we're working on, and maybe it's like a really simple thing. It's like, I don't know. We were talking about cookie clicker last week. We talked about it a little bit before the podcast. It's like, click on a thing to get some stuff, right? And as you iterate forward, you might hit some weird point where it's like, just you built a bunch of systems on top of that. But you get the sense that you're like, there's some other shape of the foundational, just whole thing, that whole interaction, that if it were different, would actually make all of this like sing better. Or because of the way this feels like it's tilting, you're kind of ideally, if you make your game playable as often as possible, and so you can feel where it's trying to go, then you just kind of sometimes have to, cleave something off and then just fully replace it in order to do then some higher up thing. Because the reality is like games are always they're just doing the same thing over and over again. That's like a game is just literally mechanically, it's just doing the same thing over again. And so sometimes it's the case that in the process of like adding, you don't have enough room for improvements anymore or something like that. You have a mechanic, you have a loop. You're supposed to do a lot of things so you can get better at doing those things. That's it.
The same thing.
The same thing. And so sometimes you're like, oh, there's not actually enough complexity in that thing, that baseline thing, to have more stuff to do. We've like run out of possible things to pull on here. And so you have to make some changes. You have to make things a little more complex or whatever else. And so ideally you have enough like the dev flexibility there where it's like, where you can just feel through that process, because it's so tricky to like essentially pre-plan all of it. And this is why oftentimes you see in terms of direction, you want to work with design pillars, which is essentially like an interpretable concept, right?
Yeah, non-specific, right? It's a vibe.
Yeah, it's a vibe. And the reason it's a vibe is because like you have to, all the mechanics and stuff talk to each other in a way that is not forecastable for you. And so you actually everything is vibes based, frankly, in games design at the highest level, right?
Yeah.
You get into the details just to try to arrive at whatever that vibe is. And then in the process, everything goes sideways and you end up like ripping stuff out and changing stuff up. So the most troublesome thing is not recognizing early enough which one of the parts of an existing game or system that you've made is the one that's like causing the problem. Because actually diagnosing those things is oftentimes very fucking hard. It's like debugging.
Well, I got a pretty good example, which is actually like where the compendium came from in the original Crashlands. Mm-hmm. Is in the original Crashlands, we were trying to figure out the method by which we would deliver new recipes to the player. Where we ended with it was that anytime you crafted a workstation, it would just come with a preset batch of recipes. And then also it would enable new recipes to just kind of drop randomly from out in the world. And then otherwise you would just kind of get recipes handed to you from quests. That's where we ended. That's not where we started though.
No.
Because at the beginning, you were not Flux Dave's intergalactic courier. You were some kind of science,
generic
astronaut,
space scientist,
generic scientist person. And you would gain science points by deconstructing the different resources because there was no story, there was no quest.
It's like you're learning about log trees by cutting down log trees, basically. And then you start getting recipes based on that.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you would like get XP for chopping down those trees, and then there would be like several different levels of knowledge that you would get by reaching some threshold of science points, and then that would unlock a batch of recipes.
Kind of like how Kerbal Space Program science mode works, right?
Yeah, which is where we kind of like.
I think the problem with it was that it was too specific, where it was all tied into every single individual resource. So it's like you chop down log trees to get science points for log trees. Right. It wasn't a generic system where you can then like choose which recipe to get next or whatever else. It was it's like the core loop, basically. It's like, oh, I chop log trees. I find more recipes about things that are related to log trees, which let me chop down log trees more. It's sort of the problem is that it didn't feel very good.
It was both like deterministic and grindy. Yes. And also it would require you to like, you'd come across a new resource and then you would have to like harvest it for a while before you would get any recipes from it.
Yeah, we found you kind of need the inverse, which is like you need to have a good reason to bother chopping something down, right, in a crafting game before you go get it. Actually, otherwise it doesn't feel very good.
Yeah, because then you're just getting complaints like, I hope this is useful at some point. Yeah. And so again, in Crashlands 2, that switched over to stuff like the insights system, where you just choose what you want to get recipes in, and then you just get them, instead of like grind out a bunch of materials for no reason and then get a recipe later. So this ended up sort of that science points system in the original Crashlands ended up becoming the compendium, because the compendium was where you would see your science points and like the different things that you had unlocked for all the different things. Well, once we got rid of the science points, we still had that UI for you to like look at all that stuff. We're like, well, I guess we could just like make it a more general thing of just like whenever you harvest a resource for the first time, like we'll add it to your compendium, and it's just like some information in there. And so that's kind of where that came from. So it's kind of the idea of like, if a game system or feature isn't working for the game, there might still be some parts of it that you can repackage. Or
that's what I'll say. It's pretty rare that we like implement a feature and then fully throw it away. That does still happen, definitely, right?
Yeah, there's always a nugget of something.
It's usually that there's we learn something about how it impacts the rest of the game, the difference between the idea of what it would be like and what it's actually like to experience it. We learned something about it, and then we try to salvage something because, some work went in there, and making games is hard, takes a long time. And so if there's anything you can salvage of the work you've done, like you want to. And so it was trying
Levelhead had 3 other game modes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We had one that was like
my favorite.
Yeah, moped mode, which is basically like an endless runner.
It was like was it Super Mario Run? Is that what it's called? So
so it was like you were.
Jump, I think.
Yeah, your GR18 was swapped with a moped. I think the code is like still in there.
The code for all the modes is still
in there. The moped GR18 is still in there.
It's still in there. Yeah. And so you're basically like a moped GR18 that is just going at full speed at all times. And whenever you hit a solid wall, then you just turn around. And so all you do is jump. And then I think you just had to like touch the package to get it onto your moped, and then it's just on there. Mm-hmm. I think you might have been able to throw it as well. And so like we had that one, and then
part of why we had that too is because we knew pretty early on that the game was gonna be super challenging on mobile, and we're like, is there a mode we can come up with that like is just a little more mobile friendly? And then we prototyped it, and it was fun as fuck to actually play. I mean, it's prototyped in, right? Like, because there's a whole bunch of stuff we still needed to think through to figure out, like,
which is basically the problem with it. Yeah, I was like, how do you? It didn't have quite as much. It was tricky to use like all the same objects in there. Like, there's all these externalities that came out of it, basically, that we didn't have time.
Yeah, like the power ups don't really make sense.
Yeah,
unless you like redo all the power. So because we had 2 other game modes as well. We had a golf mode. Where so your GR18 was actually like a golf ball, and then we had like a mechanic where you would kind of like pull back and then aim it, and then you have to like launch your GR18. That one, again, like the problems with all these is they're so different from each other.
Yeah,
that trying to figure out how to integrate them in. So like, well, none of these would really make sense for the tower trial. Or like what if somebody hates like one of these game modes and then it shows up in the tower trial? And they're like, oh, God, like I just don't want to play. Because the final one we had was the flop rocket mode.
Yep.
Where GR18 would like have fuel, and then you would steer left and right to orient. and you would fly around like you do in Flop Rocket. Yeah, so the problem with all these was like they were all really fun actually, but then
They're just completely different games.
they're just totally different games, and so I think had Levelhead really gotten a lot of traction, I think it would have been worth it to find a way to like open those up as new game
definitely.
modes, but it would have taken a couple of months at least of work for each of those to figure out kind of like how to get it fully
Shaped
online.
Yeah.
So there's tons of times where we just, and like some of those things ended up being repurposed in different ways where like the Flop Rocket Giratina, we kind of repurposed that idea into the power up that turns you into a rocket. Right. So there's stuff
I guess
like that.
The way I think about the iteration process for games is that basically because everything you add changes the whole shape of the thing, actually, even if it seems like a small thing, then it actually is exactly this constant process of like, okay, we've added this new thing. How does it fit with everything else? And then what do we have to go back and change about the entire rest of the structure in order for this thing to fit properly? And then to the question asker's point is like, have we arrived at like what would clearly be a better shape? Are we adjacent to a better shape for this overall thing that means we need to like completely cut something that came much earlier, like that's really the whole process. So like it's like you build it brick by brick up, and then every time you put a new brick on, you have to be like, should we remove some of the other bricks though? It's like, which is maddening as a game gets bigger. And part of the reason why like a game like Crashlands 2 took so long, the total number of systems is insane. The total amount of content is crazy. And so it's like everything you add has the same question to it for a very long time until that's what I think like pre-production is. And production is where, for the most part, you're not having to make those kinds of changes anymore. It's like, okay, now the shape is solid. Now we just need to fill,
With Crashlands 2, I felt like pre-production was like all the way until launch day. Because it's been very different adding stuff after launch, because it feels like before launch, and this is maybe a consequence of the tools that we made, is before launch, we had the ability to just rip stuff out and replace it and change things dramatically pretty fast.
Yes.
And so when you have that option, nothing really feels settled, like just kind of emotionally, and then like once the game is out, then kind of like to this Ronniethebear's point about like, well, he's like, they're like, my game isn't live yet, so I can just kind of do whatever,
Yep.
right? Once it's live, then it's like, okay, let's leave alone the stuff that's already there and start like adding things. Because as we've been working on our content updates with like 1.1, 1.2, and now we're on to 1.3, the pace at which we can add stuff is really high because we've stopped asking questions about whether to change existing things.
Well, I think that's why, because we've talked about it before, but the first biome, the first zone and the first act basically was the first 3 years of development, right?
Yeah.
Act 2 and
but that's
3
because that includes all the tools, all the game systems, all the visual development.
It's just asking all the questions constantly, And so I think to me, it's like pre-production ended once we finished that. Because that to me is like when you're done asking those giant questions that end up reshaping everything all the time. That's where you've moved into the actual production phase of like, okay, now we just need to fill it based on all the shapes of things that we've established here. We're
ripping features out post-launch. There are kind of 3 phases, and I think people mostly talk about pre-production and production, but I think to Seth's point, there is also the post-launch production, right? Which looks, or you can think of as like that's the live service phase for Because even if you're not doing a live service game, if you're doing post-launch updates, you're at least doing temporary live services, right? Like conceptually, it's the same. It's the idea of like the game's already out, it's already in people's hands, and you're going to deliver stuff to them, deliver changes, deliver content to them while they already have it. You're building the track in front of you as you go, right? And the shape of what that looks like because of what your constraints are, what the systems are you've already built, is extremely different at the different, and that's also true in the different phases before launch too, right? Because also before launch, at some point, you got to say, we got to stop touching text because it's got to get localized. At some point, you got to say, we don't have enough time to test things if we make any more changes, right? There are these different milestones that you hit that change the nature of what production or development looks like. And there's a lot of them, like it's kind of strung throughout, but most of them are pretty like subtle and fuzzy until you hit launch. So like the pre-launch, post-launch production phases are extremely distinct compared to other milestones you hit.
The other ones you can see when you look backward, but they're harder to notice precisely the moment when you hit them.
Yeah. All right, next question comes from Mimmabip Gourkee, who says, you've mentioned before that a lot of time needs to be spent adding things to a mobile game that will make it money rather than spending that time making the game more fun. What are your thoughts on releasing a free mobile game that has just one IAP, which unlocks some small parts of the game that isn't essential for something like $7? This will allow you to make the game free and focused on fun, while still benefiting from players having less expectations on the game length and complexity since it's a mobile game. Okay, so
there's a lot to unpack here. So one is paywalls, right? Content paywalls. Two, I think in general is so again we do talk about the fact that when you're adding stuff to a mobile game or basically to a free game, you need to be thinking about it in the context of like how that might be generating money for you, because you don't make any money when people just play it, right? Like just install it, right? So the reality is like that
you do gain customer support burden.
Exactly.
By having a million players.
That's kind of the tricky bit. And so, I want to point out that there's like a kind of a difference though, which is like the monetization is inherently baked into every design. Even if the monetization is you buy it once upfront on like Steam for X amount of dollars, right? It's still baked into the design, and it's baked into then what the shape of things might look like for, content updates or whatever else, because it has to be, because the whole point is like, devs can't live unless there's like money coming in some way.
I mean, even down to stuff like I saw this person in the game dev subreddit who, or maybe it's indie gaming, either way, but they were lamenting the fact that they made a small game and they sold it for real cheap on Steam, and the game was like an hour and a half long to beat the game. So people would buy the game, play through it, beat the whole thing, love it, give it a good review, and then refund it.
Yep.
Because it was under the refund window. And so even in that scenario, it's not even about monetization affecting the game design. It's just like, how does the platform interact with, like, what are the platform's policies and stuff like 100%. That? Because if you make a game that short on Steam,
on the platform,
exactly. So making a game that short on Steam is weirdly a risk.
Well, but also making a game that cheap on Steam is a risk, because the people who go buy really cheap games are also people who have high refund rates, right? Like that's the same pool of people, right? So each one of these decisions that you make about how much does it cost, how much content is in there. Am I going to do DLCs or free updates? Or does it
money's involved in all these decisions, just kind of top to bottom.
Yeah, it's just kind of whether or not it's so clear as like, oh, we've added new cosmetics with this update, right? Or if it's just like the update is really cool and adds these features that we're hoping. We've talked about this in our previous episode with the 1.2 patch for us. Is like it's adding certain kinds of things that we think are solving a couple of high level player issues that then will cascade into more money, downstream, because it makes the game better. And so I think it's a weird thing where I think it's very explicit in the case of free to play games when there's like a new thing added for the purpose of devs making money, right? Versus in all other games, the truth is still that everything that's added should hopefully make more money for the devs. Otherwise the operation's not going to continue, right? So I think it's just baked in there.
And it's not to say that like as a developer you're purely motivated by money, but if you aren't always taking it into account, you're fucked, right? Correct. So when we're releasing we're releasing more updates for Crashlands 2, and a big reason for that is we want to get the game into as good of a spot as possible before we move on to the next project, because that increases user review scores. It potentially, like adding more features, can improve word of mouth of the game, and also by repositioning the game into a better and better spot, then that opens up new business opportunities for us to bring the game to new platforms and stuff like that, right? If we launch the game, leave it as is, and just move on, then there's a chance that we might be leaving some of those opportunities on the table and all of that. And it is the case that we want to do right by our players, and we want to respond to player feedback and all
that's
that.
where we're nicely aligned, right? That's what we're actually looking for, is always just alignment, where it's like everyone's getting something they want, right?
Yeah, because by doing right by our players, we should be able to sell more copies. That's
but that isn't. And so unfortunately, that isn't actually a 1-to-1 thing of how it works, right?
But we think it's another roll of the dice, right? Of like it might give us the opportunity to sell more copies and then keep going.
Right. So that's like that piece. And then when you get to the paywall thing, so the structure here is basically saying, okay, what if you put some like one optional content, which is there's a problem already here. So there is no content that is worth someone engaging with that will be seen as optional by a player base. I'm dead serious about that. So
unless
there's
it's
a reason
so
why
optional, they don't even know it's there, or like
cosmetics is kind
can't
of
even come up with a way to care that it's there. Right?
Yeah. So it's like
because everything's optional because it's a video game, right? So like people don't have to play it; that it's there for entertainment,
right. So typically, you'll see then if you try to do something like this is if the content is actually essentially like a DLC, right? Where it's like, oh, I don't know, it's not like you can play the whole game, but also there's if you buy this thing, then it opens up this feature set, systems, more content, right? You'll see a lot of negative reviews about that. Basically, a lot of player complaints about that structurally because they're saying, the devs shipped a game that's like incomplete and I have to pay money to experience it, even though I'm already investing my time in the free parts of this game. So there's that. Two is if you do like a wall, which is something like a Super Mario Run or whatever else, you let someone play the game. It's like free to try, right? You let someone play a game for a little bit and then you wall them with like, oh, hey, you can't go any further until you pay $5. The problem is that feels absolutely terrible from a player standpoint, and you get kind of the same thing. So
it's basically a demo.
It's basically a demo, but because it's not separate on any other stores except for Steam, you have this other problem, which is then that like the review score for the game itself will fucking crater. So this happened like Super Mario Run on iOS or whatever else. It's either people being like 5 stars, I love it because it's like a Mario game on mobile, or it's people being like 1 star paywall. Like that's always kind of the
because if you think about like a paywall creates several groups of players that normally wouldn't be separated, right? So like you've got the players who liked the game and are willing to spend the money on to get past the paywall, right? And like they'll probably give it a good review because they liked it enough to buy it. Then you got like people who think they might like the game, but they want to experience more of it before they make a decision about whether to buy, but they can't because there's a wall.
Yep.
So that's a coin toss as to whether or not those people will give the game a positive or negative review, because some of them are understanding about it and some of them are pissed off about it, right? And then you got the players who want to like the game, but like maybe they can't get past the paywall. They can't afford it. They don't have a credit card, whatever the case may be. And they're just nearly guaranteed to give you a negative review.
Yep.
Because you gave them a piece of the game, you gave them a little taste, you got them hooked, and then you just took it away, right? And so that's where you get that. We always call it the U-shaped review score, where you got like a bunch of 5 stars and a bunch of 1 stars.
Yeah, and
like
it's almost entirely just payment related, monetization related stuff. And I will say we did do so like with Flop Rocket, we did a thing where it was free, and then you could buy the Butter Up, which I think unlocked like the.
We did that with a lot of our games, right? With like the Butter Up option, which then unlocks. So we like in Flop Rocket, we did stuff like we double, I think, or maybe like gave like a 20% boost in your coin earnings, which went into your butter bank. And then like as you played more, you would just accrue more and more of these coins into your butter bank. And then when you butter up the game, it unlocks some additional features and more upgrade tracks, but also you get to redeem all those coins that you've banked, you know? Yeah. So you didn't lose anything by waiting, but eventually it would like create that pressure.
But we saw like kind of same thing where it's like, it's like not a particularly effective monetization scheme. There's a reason why.
Oh yeah. It's like 0.5% of players will butter up.
Yeah. At which point like you really may as well kind of just put ads in it, and like and remove the blockage actually from like a just pure monetization standpoint. If you're just trying to maximize money.
Yeah. From player experience standpoint, obviously never do ads, but if all you're trying to do is get money out of the game, then that's
so I think that's why.
Although these days ads are so non-performant,
they're pretty garbage too.
If that works.
They still make up more than I think 60% of mobile revenue or something like that. I think they're still the majority, which is wild. Yeah. But it's just because the vast majority of the player base isn't necessarily paying for anything directly.
Yeah.
So I think
we've also found too though with like making premium games is that keeps the door open for getting them into stuff like Apple Arcade or Google Play Pass or Xbox Game Pass or whatever. And like you can still have games that have microtransactions, and then like you have to maybe like adapt them in a way to get into those services.
Yeah, there's something you have to give like certain amounts of whatever the currency is or something by default.
But if it's already free, then those platforms probably don't want it because like
a lot of times.
If you download Clash of Clans and Google Play Pass versus just getting it regularly, like what's the difference at that point, right? Yeah. You can just have it for free either way. So, so it's, I don't know. It's,
I would say that there's a lot of these things where like, it seems like you'd have a simple answer, right? Where it's like, because it does make sense. You know, if it's like, oh yeah, it'd be nice if you could let people try stuff before they buy it. But structurally, it's kind of like the whole 2-hour refund window problem on Steam set that you were talking about with the particular shape of a game. It means that like you can't make a game on Steam that is successful, that is a less than 2-hour experience, just because structurally the platform is shaped such that it cannot happen. And I think what's interesting about this is like on Steam with the demos now, you actually can do essentially free to try stuff because the demos are fully separate app packages. They get reviewed separately from the game.
Yep.
Yeah, so they won't affect you negatively come launch time, aside from like whatever shitty experience people have like with the actual game, right, in the demo. And so, but every other platform does not do that. And so what you end up with is like, because you know, with our contacts at Apple or Google, we've had conversations like this where they're like, well, maybe you guys should try. Have you tried doing like free to try? And we're like, you guys, you do not the shape that you
don't support that.
You don't support that in a way that is remotely meaningful for anybody. And so for you to suggest that we just torpedo our fucking game because you have all of our money.
Because you don't have the features necessary.
Yeah, I'm like, get out of here, you know? And so it's like, I think the tricky part is you can see how the shape of some of these things could work if the shape of the platforms was appropriate for it, or if they wanted to try to push for that. And that's what you've seen with Steam, actually. They push for these demos. They've done a lot of stuff with demos now, as far as like being like how all that is connected on the backside. But nobody else is doing that. So it's like,
I also want to address this final note of this question, which is that, you know, doing something like this lets you make the game free and focused on fun while still benefiting from players having less expectations about the game. I feel like free players are more entitled than paying players.
It's often
in the sense that they review games more harshly. And part of it is that they don't, maybe it's not about entitlement, but it's that they don't really self-select. So if you see a game and you're like, maybe I would like this, maybe not. If you have to pay $1 for it, then if there's a chance that you're like, I don't think this is for me, right? Mm-hmm. If you have to pay anything up front at all, then you just won't buy it. Yeah. So you already will be, you know, you'll only be spending money up front on a game that you're fairly interested in. And then once you buy it, because as a human being, you're subject to the sunk cost fallacy, you know, you'll be like, well, I've spent a little bit of money on this, so I'm going to get through the tutorial. I'm going to like give it a little bit of time to kind of like see how it opens up. But if you get it for free, then you're like, this fucking game had better just titillate all of my senses immediately or I'm out of here. And so the expectations, I feel, on a free game are weirdly much higher. And also you have the problem of device performance and stuff where like people who will bias toward free games will be people who like generally won't be spending money on the higher end devices. They'll just have worse phones or worse PCs.
It'll just
or
be
whatever
biased towards that, right? Because there's obviously
it's biased toward that.
Yeah, but it'll be biased towards that.
And so that means like you'll also run into a lot more performance problems and complaints about optimization and stuff from free players who, you know, they won't spend any money on your game, but it better run perfectly.
There's also that.
You know,
there's also
give it a thumbs down.
there's a significant population of gamers who like truly deeply believe that games should be made for free, that game developers shouldn't be paid, that it should be something you do out of passion only, and anything else is like tainted and evil, right? And that group of players also is like biased towards because they don't buy games, right? So they're the free population of people who are just getting free games, or in this case, pirating a lot of games too, right? But getting free games it's also biased towards that group of people who basically, honestly, just hate game developers and hate the whole thing. And so a free to play title has like, again, these are loose biases, right? Because it's not that this is all good.
It's not a monolith.
There's a whole bunch of biases in the group of people who get free games, which again, it's not saying everybody, because most people who get free games are just regular ass people trying out a game, right?
Yeah, because most people get free games.
Yeah,
right. Because like they're free.
But like
so
all of the most difficult people to deal with are biased towards like I'm going to get it for free and then not give you any money, right? And anything you do makes me mad, right, towards that group. And so that's a lot of why you tend to have a lot more hostility from that group of players and also have a lot more negative reviews and all that kind of stuff. And so, what we've always found historically was like trying to cater towards that audience is an exercise in extreme frustration, right? Try to be like, look how much I've given you. Like, it's just $1 to get this other thing. And then they're like, fuck you,
Fuck you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, and I think the part of the reason why free to play works is the same reason why it has this edge to it, which is this, just like it's the endowment effect, basically what it's called in psych, which is like, if you give someone a mug, you let them use it. And then you say, okay, how much would you sell that mug for? Right. They'll be like, this is my mug. I've used it. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good mug. So I'm like $7.
Yeah. And if I sell it, I got to like get a new mug now. And that's a pain in the ass,
exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah.
But if you just try to sell them the mug, right? And say, how much would you buy this for? They'll be like, I don't know, like 50 cents, $1.
I don't even need a mug.
And so the benefit of that whole thing is that when you're a person who's playing a game that's free, right? This is why microtransactions work, is like the value of things that basically you're building up value in the game itself by playing, right? You get more attached to the game, whatever else. So those microtransactions that maybe your first hour of gameplay, you were like, who would ever do that? At some point, they like the value peaks up, right? Where it's like, oh wow, this is actually worth a lot because like I have a lot of like experience in this thing. And so
this is also why people who would spend $20 on a skin in Fortnite or something without a second thought will spend 3 days debating on the Steam forums whether or not a $20 entire game is overpriced. Right. Yes. They'll be like, yeah, I only got like 65 hours of gameplay out of this. I don't feel $20 feels like it's kind of a shitty value, right?
Yeah.
And then they just go quickly. They just go buy a skin for $20.
I think it's also the people know how to value something they've experienced, right? Because
exactly,
because it's also true, right? That like if you know, like if having a cosmetic skin in a game like Fortnite that you're playing every night or whatever, it might be easy to be like, oh yeah, that's worth $20 for me because like what I'm experiencing, what this means for like how I engage with this game and so on, right?
Well, it's an expectation change because like a skin
is a whole
meant
game and you don't know what to expect, right?
Yeah,
at all. And the only way
like
you evaluate it is based on dollars per hour. Like you fall back to baseline valuations that aren't based on actual experience, right?
Well, and also like when you look at a skin, you know what it's going to deliver, which is it's going to look like that. That's all that it does. It looks like that,
right?
And you buy it and you're like, yep, that was it. I got what I expected. I got what I asked for.
That's true, yeah.
In the same way that, like, I remember when we were launching Towel Fight 2, which was our first game we launched for $3. And, we tried to frame that as when we talk about it, like, oh, yeah, like for like less than the price of a cup of coffee, you can get this entire game, right? People don't fucking make that decision. That's
an irrelevant.
That's not how decision making works. You're like, do I get my coffee today or do I buy Towel Fight 2? It's like, no, like you're deciding between Towel Fight 2 or 1 trillion free games on the App Store, not coffee at Towel Fight 2.
Right. Yeah. So it's all so complicated because you got platform stuff to consider. You have, of course, like the genre of the game. Certain genres don't even work with certain monetization schemes, right? You have then like the player base you're targeting in the first place. Just like the whole thing is so complicated that it's also the case that, looking at any one game that has done really well and then being like, oh, we'll just do what they did, but in this other context, oftentimes doesn't fucking work. And so it's like, it's just, I don't know, it's tricky. All of it's super tricky.
I think it's like with so much of design in general and game design in particular, I think it's that you have to simultaneously recognize that there's like not a way to win, right? And then just decide, go with what you think is best, makes the most sense for your combination of goals you're trying to achieve, right? Because if you try to play the game of like, oh, I want to make sure I just squeeze this by players so they don't get too upset, they're going to get upset. There's no way around it. When I say they, remember, like, this is always like so hard to talk about because like we'll be like, players get upset. We mean 5% of players, right? Those are the ones you hear from, and those are the ones that draw all that negative vibes. Even when we're talking about the U-shaped review curve, like, do those 1 point review scores matter? They matter in the aggregate because people see like, oh, you got a 3.5 or whatever, right? But if people take that next step of looking at reviews, then the people who would spend money will see that all the negative reviews are from people who won't spend money. Yeah. And then they won't give a shit, right? And the same way that you go to an Amazon review and you're like, all the negative reviews are people complaining about shipping. Who gives a shit, right? So there's so much nuance all the way throughout. The kind of the net effect is like, there's not a way to look at what is happening and be like, okay, yeah, I can just do this and that will work fine. What you instead have to do is realize that every decision you make is going to have pros and cons, every single one. and try to make some good guesses about what those pros and cons are. Like exhaustively try to figure out like, what do those look like? How are players going to respond? What are the subsets of players? How does each respond, right? And does the net effect of all of that get me what I'm trying to accomplish if it all happens to work out, right? And move forward that way rather than trying to like minimize how upset free-to-play players get or something like that, right? Focus on just like, what am I trying to do? Here are my options.
Yep.
What could those look like? And remember that players fall into lots of subpopulations. The shitty ones have outsized visual impact on your experience as a developer, but are not representative at all of the actual population of people who download, play, and buy games.
Yeah, I do think it's a concern of it's a concern of game developers typically, like if you're getting started at the very beginning, there's way more onus put on negative player responses to your decisions, right? And we've done this too. This was our lives for the first bit. Then is warranted because they're so loud and because you're kind of alone by yourself and you're trying to make something work.
And it hurts your feelings. Like,
it hurts your feelings. And it's just like you know?
Yeah, you spend years making something. Somebody looks at it for 8 minutes and like, fuck this. Right? And you're like, but
well, like,
give it a
we
chance.
launched the 1.2 patch and then instantly saw a negative review where the person was they were mad that the hardcore mode got added. It doesn't change anything else about the rest of the game.
They were like, I don't think this should be in
optional.
the game. Now, granted, it's an optional thing that you can just not turn on. So for them, it's not in the game if they just don't turn it on. But they still felt the need to make several posts about it and then give the game a thumbs down on Steam with a big rant. And
it's like, keep in mind that there are negative reviews from people who played the first one who were like, "There's no hardcore mode."
Yeah.
Right.
So we added it.
Yeah,
so you get this thing.
That's what I mean. Like you can't make everybody
There's no pure
happy.
win. Yes.
Yeah, which is and that's
my favorite was I think I don't know if we mentioned this on the podcast, but after we released the 1.1 update, we had somebody give the game a negative review because we added stuff, and this was an indication that we just chose not to have this stuff at launch and therefore basically wasted and
their
purposely
time and money.
released an unfinished game and scammed people. And the fact that we did a content update proves that we had scammed people.
Yeah, exactly.
So again,
you get
some people
constantly.
are just real determined to be mad, and you just can't.
And they're
win those
overrepresented in reviews.
Mm-hmm.
Further overrepresented in your own brain, right? So
Early on,
being
you're
able
trying to figure out how to think about this in a way that like it does feel safe. You know what I mean? Like I think that's what you got to bridge, which is like if you're trying to figure out exactly where to put these things to manage like the psychological safety aspect of selling a game to players.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if you start getting this far down into it, it's part of the reason why I think to us like selling games up front is frankly just mentally easier because it has one point of people being mad about price and stuff. It doesn't have like a bajillion things we have to constantly think about, like on the overall monetization about stuff people could get mad about that aspect, right?
Yeah, and the mad about price mostly keeps people out entirely. There's still the subset who do buy it at that price and then are still mad about it, but we've already like shrunken that pool dramatically of people to listen to.
Yeah, and so I think it's like I don't know. It's you have to ask yourself whenever you find a shape of these things, you're like, I think this would work, right? If you look around and you can't find a lot of successful games that use the shape that you're looking at, then it probably does not work. I'm dead serious.
But you should try to figure out why, or come up with a hypothesis about why, right? Because that's what it comes down to is like try to figure out what people are doing, what your game is, what you could be doing, what it has looked like when people have done things like that, what players say, like just try to, it's market research. Just try to figure out like, how does this stuff actually interact with players and with the success of a title, right? Mm-hmm. Generate some guesses because you'll never know. Just generate some guesses and you have to be careful not to bias yourself looking, for evidence that it does work, right? You want to be looking look at just what is happening. Like that's what you actually want to do. Just like look at all of it and see how represented like your ideas are. Yeah. And if they tend to be overrepresented with stuff that's successful, underrepresented instead, if people tend to complain about it a lot, if it matters, because that's the other part. Does it matter that people complain about it a lot, right? Because no matter what you do, I mentioned this a few episodes ago too, where I was like, I bet anything that even an adorable, wholesome game like A Short Hike has people being mad and complaining. And sure enough, the first thing you can see on there is like a stupid negative review about somebody who's just mad, right? About the most adorable game in the universe, right? There's just no There's no
Well,
avoiding
also,
it. You
Adam,
have to understand what are the consequences, right?
Yeah.
And Adam, I was thinking about your point about like if people want to get say like Super Mario Run and they look at the reviews and then they see that the negative reviews are about people who just didn't want to spend money, right? And if somebody is like, well, I'm okay with spending some money on this game, so no problem, right? There's also a subset of players who don't read anything. They don't read reviews. They don't read store descriptions. They don't read stuff in the game itself, right? And like those are the people who then get blindsided by the fact that they have to spend money.
That's true. They didn't even know this is going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So like the fact that a game might have 50,000 one-star reviews, all of which say you have to spend money at some point, right? The fact that there's 50,000 of them means that not a single one of those fucking people read those reviews ahead of time.
Yeah, which is also, and that's another reminder.
Because they all got surprised by it. You know?
Yeah, we always relearn this lesson constantly. We do it with Crashlands too, also, that that your average player will not fucking read anything you put in front of them. They just will not. And anything that requires any degree of like understanding is going to basically create a problem, right? So there won't be, if you're doing a free to play game, there's, to Seth's point, there's not a way that you can successfully communicate to the player that at some point money becomes involved.
Including if they boot up the game and the first thing that happens is a pop-up message that says, wait, before you play this game, just know that you might have to spend money at some point. They won't read it and they'll click OK. They just won't read it.
And again, by they, I don't mean literally all of them. There's a significant, large subset, right?
Well, I wouldn't even say, to your point, I wouldn't even say that like the average player doesn't like read the stuff. It's more like the players who are more prone to be on the negative side are also the ones who are, it is almost impossible for you to communicate with effectively because of this behavior pattern, right? And so it's like the people who you need to, this is the classic communication problem, which is like the people you need to communicate things to the most are the ones who are literally impossible for you to get that message to, right?
You cannot communicate.
But that's the reason why you need to communicate with them the most, because they keep missing information over and over again. And you're like, if I could just break through and just convey one thing to this person.
And you can't. Stop. And that's the other reason that we really like pay up front as a game system, because no one's confused about the fact that there's an exchange of money before you get the game. And then now you've got it, right? If there's also like DLCs or in-app purchases beyond that point, now you get back into the whole, there's going to be a subset of people who are confused again, right? But doing that is just so clean. Everybody understands what's happening. It's so simple. The problem, of course, is that especially on mobile, nobody will buy a game up front. So
I think also what's really interesting about this, if you think about like demo rates and stuff, is that even games with demos, active demos that you could either buy the game right now while it's on sale for summer sale or something like that, or you could just download the demo. Like the buttons are right next to each other. Demos don't, like for games that are successful, demos aren't being downloaded and played more than the games being purchased. Yeah, which is a really important note. Which is like basically saying that at least on Steam, only a subset of players are willing to try a game through like a demo system rather than just buying it and playing it for a couple of hours and then maybe refunding it. You know what I mean? So like you can't, there's not a way to work around these things that hits everybody somehow, because there's not a guaranteed flow for how these things work. And I think like refund reviews from people who refund it still show up, you know what I mean? Which makes sense.
Well, there are some weird things you can do. Like I've seen developers do stuff like make their game like a free early access demo style thing on itch. Yeah. And then have a store page on Steam to gather wish lists, and then like send people to Steam to wish list the game through the demo that you're distributing on itch, but don't actually release anything on Steam. Yeah. You know? And
I've
like
only done
once
successfully with what was that game?
Forager did.
Yeah, Forager, yep.
That's like the highest profile one that did it, but I think it's another way of, it's just another way of like just opening up, for community stuff.
It's thought of as kind of a low risk way to just like put it on a platform that doesn't have that many people, make it available. And then just like whatever happens there doesn't spill over onto Steam and mess with your review scores or something like that. Yeah. There's a lot of weird ways people try to do to get around it. But again, like there's no real option for that on mobile. No. So I guess you could maybe like launch a demo version that's a separate app at some point beforehand, and then like unpublish that or something. I don't know.
The problem you run into then is that unless you can, because it's almost impossible to move data between two apps on
Yeah,
on
without like
mobile.
a user login system or
Because
something.
now you're gonna have the population of people who like just thought it was free. It was the same game but free, right? And then they get the demo, and then they get run to the end of it, and then they've now sunk in 2 hours. They don't know how to like move that progress to the main game, and now they're mad about that, reasonably, but mad about that instead, and now less likely to get the game because they've already just lost 2 out, right? And I think I've seen a few times for premium titles where somebody did have like they had like the main game with the pay up front. And they had like the free version, where the free version was the same as the main game, but had like a paid unlock in it or something like I'm pretty sure I've seen that before. But the problem there is now you're splitting store visibility between two titles, the same title, and all of the stores are algorithmically based, and so now all of a sudden the traffic to each one drops precipitously.
More than half, you know what I mean? It's
A huge drop at each one, and now you're not getting full visibility of your title, which is
and if you're thinking of
Steam
buying,
did this by having demos be part of your application, is so that you don't have this loss of visibility. So that basically Steam uses whatever's going on with your demo to help drive visibility of your main title because they're actually linked together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess it's complicated a little bit.
Complicated. I think it's tempting to feel like there might be some like, I don't know, shape of the puzzle that will just like, oh yeah, it'll definitely go.
There's no magic solution.
But because of all these interactions with stuff, then it's just, there's no, well, I guess the thing is like, there is a pure win just in the sense of like, yeah, if you have, I don't know, like an absolute banger of a title that has like a 95% review score and, sell it up front on Steam or whatever else, then you're sort of like the least impacted by stuff like this. But the vast, I guess, none of the problems are problems once you have like an accidental blockbuster on your hands. You know what I mean? Because you can't plan for that. But that's not, you should plan for what the
like nobody
case is.
talks about like the monetization of like Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever, right? Because it's like they just sold it and it worked.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Yeah, like sometimes games will just make so much money that it's hard to argue that they should have done it differently. But then you'll also see like thousands of other games doing it differently and also seeing some level of success. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's
thousands of guys doing it the same and not seeing any success.
And failing like silently,
Yeah. Well, that's another point is because of the survivorship bias problem, right? Like most games, period, don't make money. As in like the median income for a game is $0.
I think so. Probably the upper quartile is also $0. I would.
It's probably also zero, which means that every single technique you can think of monetizing a game utterly fails most of the time.
Typically produces $0.
Yeah. But that's not necessarily because of the monetization. It might just be because of the game, right? Mm-hmm. Or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think that is, and that's probably the good point to end on, is ultimately the thing that matters most is the game and its visibility within whatever market you're trying to publish it in.
Yes.
Which is influenced by whatever your monetization strategy is. And so you need to be aligning those things really well. But what matters more than anything else is the game and that game's alignment with how the market expects monetization to work and how you did your monetization. Mm-hmm. If you can get all those three things really well aligned, and again, at base, have a game that people think they want, then that's actually the thing that matters. It's not really the specifics of like, does this model work? Does that model work? Like, it always depends. It depends. But at core, a game that people want being shown to the people who want it is that's the thing that makes the game successful.
And if money can change hands somehow, just think is Super Mario Run made fuckload of money.
Yep.
So like we're over here like bashing on how like, oh yeah, like, well, you put that wall in there, then you get this U-shaped review score. It's like, sure, but like I would kill to have as many one-star reviews as they had, because that just means they have millions and millions and millions of players.
Mm-hmm. And the fact is too, like Crashlands 2, had we like on mobile had better alignment with mobile players' expectations, as in, right? Because right now we have like a 4.9 review score with a $10 game on mobile, right? Mm-hmm. Which is truly amazing. But if we had made a free-to-play version of it instead, we would have ended up with a 3.5 review score or something like that, right? But we'd have had much tighter alignment with how that market works and player expectations in that market, and potentially generated a fuckload more revenue than we could with a premium title, right?
But it's if you try to launch on Steam too, now everyone's into
that people are like free to play mobile garbage.
Because there's a price difference. Well, I mean, if there's a price difference, I'm saying, just already.
Yeah. Well, because then you have the people who are. We already have people who are upset that it costs a different amount of money on Steam versus mobile.
Yes.
And then if now it's free to play on mobile and costs $20 or $25 on Steam, then that's an even bigger gulf, you know? So yeah, again, there's no winning. You can lose in a whole bunch of different interesting ways.
Yep.
But ultimately you just got to make a really good game and have lots of people get in there and then just hope for the best.
Yep.
So yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And again, if you haven't yet picked up a copy of Crashlands 2, Level Ahead, or Crashlands on Steam, the summer sale is just about over, so go get those. And if you haven't played any of our games, give them a good review wherever you're playing them, because that helps a lot. So we appreciate it. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.